Hello, bedtime adventurers. Get ready for a cozy night with enchanting fairy tales edited by Andrew Lang. These stories are like magical dreams filled with an enchanted watch, a mysterious ring, a magical snuff box, and even a crystal coffin. So snuggle up, close your eyes, and let these whimsical tales weave their spell. It's time to drift into a world of enchantment, sweet dreams.
The Enchanted Watch. Once upon a time there lived a rich man who had 3 sons. When they grew up, he sent the eldest to travel and see the world, and 3 years passed before his family saw him again. Then he returned, magnificently dressed, and his father was so delighted with his behavior that he gave a great feast in his honor, to which all the relations and friends were invited. When the rejoicings were ended, the second son begged leave of his father to go in his turn to travel and mix with the world. The father was enchanted at the request and gave him plenty of money for his expenses, saying, "If you behave as well as your brother, I will do honor to you as I did to him." The young man promised to do his best, and his conduct during 3 years was all that it should be. Then he went home, and his father was so pleased with him that his feast of welcome was even more splendid than the one before. The third brother, whose name was Jenik or Johnny, was considered the most foolish of the 3. He never did anything at home except sit over the stove and dirty himself with the ashes. But he also begged his father's leave to travel for 3 years. "Go if you like, you idiot. But what good will it do you?" The youth paid no heed to his father's observations as long as he obtained permission to go. The father saw him depart with joy, glad to get rid of him, and gave him a handsome sum of money for his needs. Once, as he was making one of his journeys, Jenik chanced to cross a meadow where some shepherds were just about to kill a dog. He entreated them to spare it, and to give it to him instead, which they willingly did, and he went on his way, followed by the dog. A little further on he came upon a cat, which someone was going to put to death. He implored its life, and the cat followed him. Finally, in another place, he saved a serpent, which was also handed over to him. And now they made a party of 4th dog behind Jenik, the cat behind the dog, and the serpent behind the cat. Then the serpent said to Jenik, "Go wherever you see me go, for in the autumn, when all the serpents hide themselves in their holes, this serpent was going in search of his king, who was king of all the snakes." Then he added, "My king will scold me for my long absence. Everyone else is housed for the winter, and I am very late. I shall have to tell him what danger I have been in, and how, without your help, I should certainly have lost my life. The king will ask what you would like in return, and be sure you beg for the watch which hangs on the wall. It has all sorts of wonderful properties. You only need to rub it to get whatever you like." No sooner said than done. Jenik became the master of the watch, and the moment he got out he wished to put its virtues to the proof. He was hungry, and thought it would be delightful to eat in the meadow a loaf of new bread and a steak of good beef, washed down by a flask of wine. So he scratched the watch, and in an instant it was all before him. Imagine his joy. Evening soon came, and Jenik rubbed his watch, and thought it would be very pleasant to have a room with a comfortable bed and a good supper. In an instant they were all before him. After supper he went to bed and slept till morning, as every honest man ought to do. Then he set forth for his father's house, his mind dwelling on the feast that would be awaiting him. But as he returned in the same old clothes in which he went away, his father flew into a great rage, and refused to do anything for him. Jenik went to his old place near the stove, and dirtied himself in the ashes without anybody minding. The 3rd day, feeling rather dull, he thought it would be nice to see a 3-story house, filled with beautiful furniture, and with vessels of silver and gold. So he rubbed the watch, and there it all was. Jenik went to look for his father, and said to him, You offered me no feast of welcome, but permit me to give one to you, and come and let me show you my plate." The father was much astonished, and longed to know where his son had got all this wealth. Jenik did not reply, but begged him to invite all their relations and friends to a grand banquet. So the father invited all the world, and everyone was amazed to see such splendid things. So much plate, and so many fine dishes on the table. After the first course, Jenik prayed his father to invite the king and his daughter the princess. He rubbed his watch and wished for a carriage ornamented with gold and silver, and drawn by 6 horses, with harness glittering with precious stones. The father did not dare to sit in this gorgeous coach, but went to the palace on foot. The king and his daughter were immensely surprised with the beauty of the carriage, and mounted the steps at once to go to Jenik's banquet. Then Jenik rubbed his watch afresh, and wished that for 6 miles the way to the house should be paved with marble. Whoever felt so astonished as the king? Never had he traveled over such a gorgeous road. When Jenik heard the wheels of the carriage, he rubbed his watch, and wished for a still more beautiful house, 4 stories high, and hung with gold, silver, and damask, filled with wonderful tables, covered with dishes such as no king had ever eaten before. The king, the queen, and the princess were speechless with surprise. Never had they seen such a splendid palace, nor such a high feast. At dessert, the king asked Jenik's father to give him the young man for a son-in-law. No sooner said than done. The marriage took place at once, and the king returned to his own palace and left Jenik with his wife in the enchanted house. Now Jenik was not a very clever man, and at the end of a very short time he began to bore his wife. She inquired how he managed to build palaces and to get so many precious things. He told her all about the watch, and she never rested till she had stolen the precious talisman. One night she took the watch, rubbed it, and wished for a carriage drawn by 4 horses. And in this carriage she at once set out for her father's palace. There she called to her own attendants, bade them follow her into the carriage, and drove straight to the seaside. Then she rubbed her watch, and wished that the sea might be crossed by a bridge, and that a magnificent palace might arise in the middle of the sea. No sooner said than done. The princess entered the house, rubbed her watch, and in an instant the bridge was gone. Left alone, Jenik felt very miserable. His father, mother, and brothers, and indeed everybody else, all laughed at him. Nothing remained to him but the cat and dog whose lives he had once saved. He took them with him and went far away, for he could no longer live with his family. He reached at last a great desert, and saw some crows flying towards a mountain. One of them was a long way behind, and when he arrived, his brothers inquired what had made him so late. "Winter is here," they said, "and it is time to fly to other countries." He told them that he had seen in the middle of the sea the most wonderful house that ever was built. On hearing this, Jenik at once concluded that this must be the hiding place of his wife. So he proceeded directly to the shore with his dog and his cat. When he arrived on the beach, he said to the dog, "You are an excellent swimmer, and you, little one, are very light. Jump on the dog's back and he will take you to the palace. Once there, he will hide himself near the door, and you must steal secretly in and try to get hold of my watch." No sooner said than done. The 2 animals crossed the sea. The dog hid near the house, and the cat stole into the chamber. The princess recognized him and guessed why he had come, and she took the watch down to the cellar and locked it in a box. But the cat wriggled its way into the cellar, and the moment the princess turned her back, he scratched and scratched till he had made a hole in the box. Then he took the watch between his teeth and waited quietly till the princess came back. Scarcely had she opened the door when the cat was outside, and the watch into the bargain. The cat was no sooner beyond the gates than she said to the dog, "We're going to cross the sea. Be very careful not to speak to me." The dog laid this to heart and said nothing. But when they approached the shore, he could not help asking, "Have you got the watch?" The cat did not answer. He was afraid that he might let the talisman fall. When they touched the shore, the dog repeated his question. "Yes," said the cat. And the watch fell into the sea. Then our two friends began each to accuse the other, and both looked sorrowfully at the place where their treasure had fallen in. Suddenly, a fish appeared near the edge of the sea. The cat seized it and thought it would make them a good supper. "I have 9 little children," cried the fish. "Spare the father of a family." "Granted," replied the cat, "but on condition that you find our watch." The fish executed his commission, and they brought the treasure back to their master. Jenik rubbed the watch and wished that the palace, with the princess and all its inhabitants, should be swallowed up in the sea. No sooner said than done. Jenik returned to his parents, and he and his watch, his cat and his dog, lived together happily to the end of their days. The Enchanted Ring. Once upon a time there lived a young man named Rosamond, who was as good and handsome as his elder brother Bramintho was ugly and wicked. Their mother detested her eldest son, and had only eyes for the youngest. This excited Bramintho's jealousy, and he invented a horrible story in order to ruin his brother. He told his father that Rosamond was in the habit of visiting a neighbor who was an enemy of the family, and betraying to him all that went on in the house, and was plotting with him to poison their father. The father flew into a rage and flogged his son till the blood came. Then he threw him into prison and kept him for 3 days without food, and after that he turned him out of the house and threatened to kill him if he ever came back. The mother was miserable and did nothing but weep, but she dared not say anything. The youth left his home with tears in his eyes, not knowing where to go, and wandered about for many hours till he came to a thick wood. Night overtook him at the foot of a great rock, and he fell asleep on a bank of moss, lulled by the music of a little brook. It was dawn when he woke, and he saw before him a beautiful woman seated on a gray horse, with trappings of gold, who looked as if she were preparing for the hunt. "Have you seen a stag and some deerhounds go by?" she asked. "No, madam," he replied. Then she added, "You look unhappy. Is there anything the matter? Take this ring, which will make you the happiest and most powerful of men, provided you never make a bad use of it. If you turn the diamond inside, you will become invisible. If you turn it outside, you will become visible again. If you place it on your little finger, you will take the shape of the king's son, followed by a splendid court. If you put it on your 4th finger, you will take your own shape." Then the young man understood that it was a fairy who was speaking to him, and when she had finished, she plunged into the woods. The youth was very impatient to try the ring, and returned home immediately. He found that the fairy had spoken the truth, and that he could see and hear everything, while he himself was unseen. It lay with him to revenge himself, if he chose, on his brother, without the slightest danger to himself. And he told no one but his mother of all the strange things that had befallen him. He afterwards put the enchanted ring on his little finger, and appeared as the king's son, followed by 100 fine horses, and a guard of officers all richly dressed. His father was much surprised to see the king's son in his quiet little house, and he felt rather embarrassed, not knowing what was the proper way to behave on such a grand occasion. Then Rosamond asked him how many sons he had. 2, replied he. "I wish to see them," said Rosamond. "Send for them at once. I desire to take them both to court, in order to make their fortunes." The father hesitated, then answered, "Here is the eldest, whom I have the honor to present to your highness. But where is the youngest?" "I wish to see him too," persisted Rosamond. "He is not here," said the father. "I had to punish him for a fault, and he has run away." Then Rosamond replied, "You should have shown him what was right, but not have punished him. However, let the elder come with me, and as for you, follow these two guards, who will escort you to a place that I will point out to them." Then the two guards led off the father, and the fairy of whom you have heard found him in the forest, and beat him with a golden birch rod, and cast him into a cave that was very deep and dark, where he lay enchanted. "Lie there," she said, "till your son comes to take you out again." Meanwhile, the son went to the king's palace, and arrived just when the real prince was absent. He had sailed away to make war on a distant island, but the winds had been contrary, and he had been shipwrecked on unknown shores and taken captive by a savage people. Rosamond made his appearance at court in the character of the prince, whom everyone wept for as lost, and told them that he had been rescued when at the point of death by some merchants. His return was the signal for great public rejoicings, and the king was so overcome that he became quite speechless and did nothing but embrace his son. The queen was even more delighted, and fetes were ordered over the whole kingdom. One day the false prince said to his real brother, Bramintho, "You know that I brought you here from your native village in order to make your fortune. But I have found out that you are a liar, and that by your deceit you have been the cause of all the troubles of your brother Rosamond. He is in hiding here, and I desire that you shall speak to him and listen to his reproaches." Bramintho trembled at these words, and flinging himself at the prince's feet, confessed his crime. "That is not enough," said Rosamond. "It is to your brother that you must confess, and I desire that you shall ask his forgiveness. He will be very generous if he grants it, and it will be more than you deserve. He is in my anteroom, where you shall see him at once. I myself will retire into another apartment, so as to leave you alone with him." Bramintho entered, as he was told, into the anteroom. Then Rosamond changed the ring, and passed into the room by another door. Bramintho was filled with shame as soon as he saw his brother's face. He implored his pardon, and promised to atone for all his faults. Rosamond embraced him with tears, and at once forgave him, adding, "I am in great favor with the king. It rests with me to have your head cut off, or to condemn you to pass the remainder of your life in prison. But I desire to be as good to you as you have been wicked to me." Bramintho, confused and ashamed, listened to his words without daring to lift his eyes or to remind Rosamond that he was his brother. After this, Rosamond gave out that he was going to make a secret voyage to marry a princess who lived in a neighboring kingdom. But in reality, he only went to see his mother, whom he told all that had happened at the court, giving her at the same time some money that she needed, for the king allowed him to take exactly what he liked, though he was always careful not to abuse this permission. Just then, a furious war broke out between the king his master and the sovereign of the adjoining country, who was a bad man and one that never kept his word. Rosamond went straight to the palace of the wicked king, and by means of his ring was able to be present at all the councils, and learn all their schemes, so that he was able to forestall them and bring them to naught. He took the command of the army which was brought against the wicked king, and defeated him in a glorious battle, so that peace was at once concluded on conditions that were just to everyone. Henceforth the king's one idea was to marry the young man to a princess, who was the heiress to a neighboring kingdom, and besides that, was as lovely as the day. But one morning, while Rosamond was hunting in the forest where for the first time he had seen the fairy, his benefactress suddenly appeared before him. "Take heed," she said to him in severe tones, "that you do not marry anybody who believes you to be a prince. You must never deceive anyone. The real prince, whom the whole nation thinks you are, will have to succeed his father, for that is just and right. Go and seek him in some distant island, and I will send winds that will swell your sails and bring you to him. Hasten to render this service to your master, although it is against your own ambition, and prepare, like an honest man, to return to your natural state. If you do not do this, you will become wicked and unhappy, and I will abandon you to all your former troubles." Rosamond took these wise counsels to heart. He gave out that he had undertaken a secret mission to a neighboring state, and embarked on board a vessel, the winds carrying him straight to the island, where the fairy had told him he would find the real prince. This unfortunate youth had been taken captive by a savage people who had kept him to guard their sheep. Rosamond, becoming invisible, went to seek him amongst the pastures, where he kept his flock, and, covering him with his mantle, he delivered him out of the hands of his cruel masters, and bore him back to the ship. Other winds sent by the fairy swelled the sails, and together the two young men entered the king's presence. Rosamond spoke first and said, "You have believed me to be your son. I am not he, but I have brought him back to you." The king, filled with astonishment, turned to his real son and asked, "Was it not you, my son, who conquered my enemies and won such a glorious peace? Or is it true that you have been shipwrecked and taken captive, and that Rosamond has set you free?" "Yes, my father," replied the prince. "It is he who sought me out in my captivity and set me free, and to him I owe the happiness of seeing you once more. It was he, not I, who gained the victory." The king could hardly believe his ears. But Rosamond, turning the ring, appeared before him in the likeness of the prince. And the king gazed distractedly at the two youths who seemed both to be his son. Then he offered Rosamond immense rewards for his services, which were refused. And the only favor the young man would accept was that one of his posts at court should be conferred on his brother Bramintho, for he feared for himself the changes of fortune, the envy of mankind, and his own weakness. His desire was to go back to his mother and his native village, and to spend his time in cultivating the land. One day, when he was wandering through the woods, he met the fairy, who showed him the cavern where his father was imprisoned, and told him what words he must use in order to set him free. He repeated them joyfully, for he had always longed to bring the old man back and to make his last days happy. Rosamond thus became the benefactor of all his family, and had the pleasure of doing good to those who had wished to do him evil. As for the court, to whom he had rendered such services, all he asked was the freedom to live far from its corruption. And to crown all, fearing that if he kept the ring he might be tempted to use it. In order to regain his lost place in the world, he made up his mind to restore it to the fairy. For many days he sought her up and down the woods, and at last he found her. "I want to give you back," he said, holding out the ring, "a gift as dangerous as it is powerful, and which I fear to use wrongfully. I shall never feel safe till I have made it impossible for me to leave my solitude and to satisfy my passions." While Rosamond was seeking to give back the ring to the fairy, Bramintho, who had failed to learn any lessons from experience, gave way to all his desires, and tried to persuade the prince, lately become king, to ill-treat Rosamond. But the fairy, who knew all about everything, said to Rosamond, when he was imploring her to accept the ring, "Your wicked brother is doing his best to poison the mind of the king towards you, and to ruin you. He deserves to be punished, and he must die. And in order that he may destroy himself, I shall give the ring to him." Rosamond wept at these words, and then asked, "What do you mean by giving him the ring as a punishment? He will only use it to persecute everyone, and to become master." "The same things," answered the fairy, "are often a healing medicine to one person and a deadly poison to another. Prosperity is the source of all evil to a naturally wicked man. If you wish to punish a scoundrel, the first thing to do is to give him power. You will see that with this rope he will soon hang himself." Having said this, she disappeared, and went straight to the palace, where she showed herself to Bramintho under the disguise of an old woman covered with rags. She at once addressed him in these words, "I have taken this ring from the hands of your brother, to whom I had lent it, and by its help he covered himself with glory. I now give it to you, and be careful what you do with it." Bramintho replied with a laugh, "I shall certainly not imitate my brother, who was foolish enough to bring back the prince, instead of reigning in his place, and he was as good as his word. The only use he made of the ring was to find out family secrets and betray them, to commit murders and every sort of wickedness, and to gain wealth for himself unlawfully." All these crimes, which could be traced to nobody, filled the people with astonishment. The king, seeing so many affairs, public and private, exposed, was at first as puzzled as anyone, till Bramintho's wonderful prosperity and amazing insolence made him suspect that the enchanted ring had become his property. In order to find out the truth, he bribed a stranger just arrived at court, one of a nation with whom the king was always at war, and arranged that he was to steal in the night to Bramintho and to offer him untold honors and rewards if he would betray the state secrets. Bramintho promised everything and accepted at once the first payment of his crime, boasting that he had a ring which rendered him invisible, and that by means of it he could penetrate into the most private places. But his triumph was short. Next day he was seized by order of the king, and his ring was taken from him. He was searched, and on him were found papers which proved his crimes. And though Rosamond himself came back to the court to entreat his pardon, it was refused. So Bramintho was put to death, and the ring had been even more fatal to him than it had been useful in the hands of his brother. To console Rosamond for the fate of Bramintho, the king gave him back the enchanted ring as a pearl without price. The unhappy Rosamond did not look upon it in the same light, and the first thing he did on his return home was to seek the fairy in the woods. "Here," he said, "is your ring. My brother's experience has made me understand many things that I did not know before. Keep it, it has only led to his destruction. Ah, without it he would be alive now, and my father and mother would not in their old age be bowed to the earth with shame and grief. Perhaps he might have been wise and happy if he had never had the chance of gratifying his wishes. Oh, how dangerous it is to have more power than the rest of the world. Take back your ring, and as ill fortune seems to follow all on whom you bestow it, I will implore you, as a favor to myself, that you will never give it to anyone who is dear to me." The Snuff-box. As often happens in this world, there was once a young man who spent all his time in traveling. One day, as he was walking along, he picked up a snuff-box. He opened it, and the snuff-box said to him in the Spanish language, "What do you want?" He was very much frightened, but luckily, instead of throwing the box away, he only shut it tight and put it in his pocket. Then he went on, away, 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 and as he went, he said to himself, "If it says to me again, 'What do you want?' I shall know better what to say this time." So he took out the snuff-box and opened it, and again it asked, "What do you want?" "My hat full of gold," answered the youth, and immediately it was full. Our young man was enchanted. Henceforth he should never be in need of anything. So on he traveled, away, 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 through thick forests, till at last he came to a beautiful castle. In the castle there lived a king. The young man walked round and round the castle, not caring who saw him, till the king noticed him and asked what he was doing there. "I was just looking at your castle. You would like to have one like it, wouldn't you?" The young man did not reply, but when it grew dark he took his snuff-box and opened the lid. "What do you want?" "Build me a castle with laths of gold and tiles of diamond, and the furniture all of silver and gold." He had scarcely finished speaking when there stood in front of him, exactly opposite the king's palace, a castle built precisely as he had ordered. When the king awoke, he was struck dumb at the sight of the magnificent house shining in the rays of the sun. The servants could not do their work for stopping to stare at it. Then the king dressed himself and went to see the young man. And he told him plainly that he was a very powerful prince, and that he hoped that they might all live together in one house or the other, and that the king would give him his daughter to wife. So it all turned out just as the king wished. The young man married the princess, and they lived happily in the palace of gold. But the king's wife was jealous both of the young man and of her own daughter. The princess had told her mother about the snuff-box, which gave them everything they wanted, and the queen bribed a servant to steal the snuff-box. They noticed carefully where it was put away every night, and one evening, when the whole world was asleep, the woman stole it and brought it to her old mistress. Oh, how happy the queen was! She opened the lid, and the snuff-box said to her, "What do you want?" And she answered at once, "I want you to take me and my husband and my servants and this beautiful house, and set us down on the other side of the Red Sea, but my daughter and her husband are to stay behind." When the young couple woke up, they found themselves back in the old castle without their snuff-box. They hunted for it high and low, but quite vainly. The young man felt that no time was to be lost, and he mounted his horse and filled his pockets with as much gold as he could carry. On he went, away, 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 but he sought the snuff-box in vain all up and down the neighboring countries. And very soon he came to the end of all his money. But still he went on, as fast as the strength of his horse would let him, begging his way. Someone told him that he ought to consult the moon, for the moon traveled far and might be able to tell him something. So he went away, 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 and ended, somehow or other, by reaching the land of the moon. There he found a little old woman who said to him, "What are you doing here?" "My son eats all living things he sees, and if you are wise, you will go away without coming any further." But the young man told her all his sad tale, and how he possessed a wonderful snuff-box, and how it had been stolen from him, and how he had nothing left, now that he was parted from his wife and was in need of everything. And he said that perhaps her son, who traveled so far, might have seen a palace, with laths of gold and tiles of diamond, and furnished all in silver and gold. As he spoke these last words, the moon came in and said he smelled mortal flesh and blood. But his mother told him that it was an unhappy man who had lost everything, and had come all this way to consult him, and bade the young man not to be afraid, but to come forward and show himself. So he went boldly up to the moon, and asked if by any accident he had seen a palace with the laths of gold, and the tiles of diamond, and all the furniture of silver and gold. Once this house belonged to him, but now it was stolen. And the moon said no, but that the sun traveled farther than he did, and that the young man had better go and ask him. So the young man departed, and went away, 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 as well as his horse would take him, begging his living as he rode along. And somehow or other, at last he got to the land of the sun. There he found a little old woman, who asked him, "What are you doing here?" "Go away. Have you not heard that my son feeds upon Christians?" But he said no, and that he would not go, for he was so miserable that it was all one to him whether he died or not, that he had lost everything, and especially a splendid palace like none other in the whole world, for it had laths of gold and tiles of diamond, and all the furniture was of silver and gold, and that he had sought it far and long, and in all the earth there was no man more unhappy. So the old woman's heart melted, and she agreed to hide him. When the son arrived, he declared that he smelled Christian flesh, and he meant to have it for his dinner. But his mother told him such a pitiful story of the miserable wretch who had lost everything, and had come from far to ask his help, that at last he promised to see him. So the young man came out from his hiding place and begged the son to tell him if in the course of his travels he had not seen somewhere a palace that had not its like in the whole world, for its laths were of gold and its tiles of diamond, and all the furniture in silver and gold. And the son said no, but that perhaps the wind had seen it, for he entered everywhere, and saw things that no one else ever saw. And if anyone knew where it was certainly the wind. Then the poor young man again set forth as well as his horse could take him, begging his living as he went. And somehow or other, he ended by reaching the home of the wind. He found there a little old woman busily occupied in filling great barrels with water. She asked him what had put it into his head to come there, for her son ate everything he saw, and that he would shortly arrive quite mad, and that the young man had better look out. But he answered that he was so unhappy that he had ceased to mind anything, even being eaten. And then he told her that he had been robbed of a palace that had not its equal in all the world, and of all that was in it, and that he had even left his wife, and was wandering over the world until he found it, and that it was the sun who had sent him to consult the wind. So she hid him under the staircase, and soon they heard the south wind arrive, shaking the house to its foundations. Thirsty as he was, he did not wait to drink, but he told his mother that he smelt the blood of a Christian man, and that she had better bring him out at once and make him ready to be eaten. But she bade her son eat and drink what was before him, and said that the poor young man was much to be pitied, and that the sun had granted him his life in order that he might consult the wind. Then she brought out the young man, who explained how he was seeking for his palace, and that no man had been able to tell him where it was, so he had come to the wind. And he added that he had been shamefully robbed, and that the laths were of gold and the tiles of diamond, and all the furniture in silver and gold, and he inquired if the wind had not seen such a palace during his wanderings. And the wind said yes, and that all that day he had been blowing backwards and forwards over it without being able to move one single tile. "Oh, do tell me where it is," cried the young man. "It is a long way off," replied the wind, "on the other side of the Red Sea." But our traveler was not discouraged. He had already journeyed too far, so he set forth at once, and somehow or other, he managed to reach that distant land. And he inquired if anyone wanted a gardener. He was told that the head gardener at the castle had just left, and perhaps he might have a chance of getting the place. The young man lost no time, but walked up to the castle and asked if they were in want of a gardener, and how happy he was when they agreed to take him. Now he passed most of his day in gossiping with the servants about the wealth of their masters and the wonderful things in the house. He made friends with one of the maids, who told him the history of the snuff-box, and he coaxed her to let him see it. One evening she managed to get hold of it, and the young man watched carefully where she hid it away in a secret place in the bedchamber of her mistress. The following night, when everyone was fast asleep, he crept in and took the snuff-box. Think of his joy as he opened the lid. When it asked him, as of yore, "What do you want?" he replied, "What do I want? What do I want? Why, I want to go with my palace to the old place, and for the king and the queen and all their servants to be drowned in the Red Sea." He hardly finished speaking when he found himself back again with his wife, while all the other inhabitants of the palace were lying at the bottom of the Red Sea. The Crystal Coffin. Now let no one say that a poor tailor can't get on in the world, and indeed, even attain to very high honor. Nothing is required but to set the right way to work, but of course the really important thing is to succeed. A very bright, active young tailor once set off on his travels, which led him into a wood, and as he did not know the way he soon lost himself. Night came on, and there seemed to be nothing for it but to seek out the best resting place he could find. He could have made himself quite comfortable with a bed of soft moss, but the fear of wild beasts disturbed his mind, and at last he determined to spend the night in a tree. He sought out a tall oak tree, climbed up to the top, and felt devoutly thankful that his big smoothing iron was in his pocket. For the wind in the treetops was so high that he might easily have been blown away altogether. After passing some hours of the night, not without considerable fear and trembling, he noticed a light shining at a little distance, and hoping it might proceed from some house where he could find a better shelter than in the top of the tree, he cautiously descended and went towards the light. It led him to a little hut all woven together of reeds and rushes. He knocked bravely at the door, which opened, and by the light which shone from within, he saw an old gray-haired man dressed in a coat made of bright-colored patches. "Who are you, and what do you want?" asked the old man roughly. "I am a poor tailor," replied the youth. "I have been benighted in the forest, and I entreat you to let me take shelter in your hut till morning." "Go your way," said the old man in a sulky tone. "I'll have nothing to do with tramps. You must just go elsewhere." With these words he tried to slip back into his house, but the tailor laid hold of his coat tails and begged so hard to be allowed to stay that the old fellow, who was by no means as cross as he appeared, was at length touched by his entreaties, let him come in, and after giving him some food, showed him quite a nice bed in one corner of the room. The weary tailor required no rocking to rest, but slept sound till early morning, when he was roused from his slumbers by a tremendous noise. Loud screams and shouts pierced the thin walls of the little hut. The tailor, with new-born courage, sprang up, threw on his clothes with all speed, and hurried out. There he saw a huge black bull engaged in a terrible fight with a fine large stag. They rushed at each other with such fury that the ground seemed to tremble under them and the whole air to be filled with their cries. For some time it appeared quite uncertain which would be the victor. But at length the stag drove his antlers with such force into his opponent's body that the bull fell to the ground with a terrific roar, and a few more strokes finished him. The tailor, who had been watching the fight with amazement, was still standing motionless when the stag bounded up to him, and before he had time to escape forked him up with its great antlers, and set off at full gallop over hedges and ditches, hill and dale, through wood and water. The tailor could do nothing but hold on tight with both hands to the stag's horns and resign himself to his fate. He felt as if he were flying along. At length the stag paused before a steep rock and gently let the tailor down to the ground. Feeling more dead than alive, he paused for a while to collect his scattered senses. But when he seemed somewhat restored, the stag struck such a blow on a door in the rock that it flew open. Flames of fire rushed forth, and such clouds of steam followed that the stag had to avert its eyes. The tailor could not think what to do or which way to turn to get away from this awful wilderness, and to find his way back amongst human beings once more. As he stood hesitating, a voice from the rock cried to him, "Step in without fear, no harm shall befall you." He still lingered, but some mysterious power seemed to impel him, and passing through the door he found himself in a spacious hall, whose ceiling, walls, and floor were covered with polished tiles carved all over with unknown figures. He gazed about, full of wonder, and was just preparing to walk out again when the same voice bade him, "Tread on the stone in the middle of the hall, and good luck will attend you." By this time he had grown so courageous that he did not hesitate to obey the order, and hardly had he stepped on the stone than it began to sink gently with him into the depths below. On reaching firm ground, he found himself in a hall of much the same size as the upper one, but with much more in it to wonder at and admire. Round the walls were several niches, in each of which stood glass vessels filled with some bright-colored spirit or bluish smoke. On the floor stood 2 large crystal boxes opposite each other, and these attracted his curiosity at once. Stepping up to one of them, he saw within it what looked like a model in miniature of a fine castle, surrounded by farms, barns, stables, and a number of other buildings. Everything was quite tiny, but so beautifully and carefully finished that it might have been the work of an accomplished artist. He would have continued gazing much longer at this remarkable curiosity had not the voice desired him to turn round and look at the crystal coffin which stood opposite. What was his amazement at seeing a girl of surpassing loveliness lying in it! She lay as though sleeping, and her long, Fair hair seemed to wrap her round like some costly mantle. Her eyes were closed, but the bright color in her face and the movement of a ribbon, which rose and fell with her breath, left no doubt as to her being alive. As the tailor stood gazing at her with a beating heart, the maiden suddenly opened her eyes and started with delighted surprise. "Great heavens!" she cried, "my deliverance approaches. Quick, quick, help me out of my prison. Only push back the bolt of this coffin and I am free." The tailor promptly obeyed when she quickly pushed back the crystal lid, stepped out of the coffin and hurried to a corner of the hall when she proceeded to wrap herself in a large cloak. Then she sat down on a stone, desired the young man to come near, and giving him an affectionate kiss, she said, "My long-hoped-for deliverer, kind heaven has led you to me, and has at length put an end to all my sufferings. You are my destined husband, and beloved by me, and endowed with every kind of riches and power. You shall spend the remainder of your life in peace and happiness. Now sit down and hear my story. I am the daughter of a wealthy nobleman. My parents died when I was very young, and they left me to the care of my eldest brother, by whom I was carefully educated. We loved each other so tenderly, and our tastes and interests were so much alike, that we determined never to marry, but to spend our entire lives together. There was no lack of society at our home. Friends and neighbors paid us frequent visits, and we kept open house for all. Thus it happened that one evening a stranger rode up to the castle and asked for hospitality, as he could not reach the nearest town that night. We granted his request with ready courtesy, and during supper he entertained us with most agreeable conversation, mingled with amusing anecdotes. My brother took such a fancy to him that he pressed him to spend a couple of days with us, which, after a little hesitation, the stranger consented to do. We rose late from table, and whilst my brother was showing our guest to his room, I hurried to mine, for I was very tired and longed to get to bed. I had hardly dropped off to sleep when I was roused by the sound of some soft and charming music. Wondering whence it could come, I was about to call to my maid who slept in the room next mine, when, to my surprise, I felt as if some heavy weight on my chest had taken all power from me, and I lay there unable to utter the slightest sound. Meantime, by the light of the night lamp, I saw the stranger enter my room, though the double doors had been securely locked. He drew near and told me that through the power of his magic arts he had caused the soft music to waken me, and had made his way through bolts and bars to offer me his hand and heart. My repugnance to his magic was so great that I would not condescend to give any answer. He waited motionless for some time, hoping no doubt for a favorable reply. But as I continued silent, he angrily declared that he would find means to punish my pride, and therewith he left the room in a rage. I spent the night in the greatest agitation, and only fell into a doze towards morning. As soon as I awoke, I jumped up and hurried to tell my brother all that had happened, but he had left his room, and his servant told me that he had gone out at daybreak to hunt with the stranger. My mind misgave me. I dressed in all haste, had my palfrey saddled, and rode off at full gallop towards the forest, attended by one servant only. I pushed on without pausing, and ere long I saw the stranger coming towards me and leading a fine stag. I asked him where he had left my brother and how he had got the stag, whose great eyes were overflowing with tears. Instead of answering, he began to laugh, and I flew into such a rage that I drew a pistol and fired at him. But the bullet rebounded from his breast and struck my horse in the forehead. I fell to the ground, and the stranger muttered some words which robbed me of my senses. When I came to myself, I was lying in a crystal coffin in this subterranean vault. The magician appeared again and told me that he had transformed my brother into a stag, had reduced our castle and all its defenses to miniature and locked them up in a glass box, and after turning all our household into different vapors had banished them into glass vials. If I would only yield to his wishes, he could easily open these vessels, and all would then resume their former shapes. I would not say a word more than I had done previously, and he vanished, leaving me in my prison, where a deep sleep soon fell on me. Amongst the many dreams which floated through my brain was a cheering one of a young man who was to come and release me. And today, when I opened my eyes, I recognized you and saw that my dream was fulfilled. Now help me to carry out the rest of my vision. The first thing is to place the glass box which contains my castle on this large stone. As soon as this was done, the stone gently rose through the air and transported them into the upper hall, whence they easily carried the box into the outer air. The lady then removed the lid, and it was marvelous to watch the castle, houses, and farmyards begin to grow and spread themselves till they had regained their proper size. Then the young couple returned by means of the movable stone and brought up all the glass vessels filled with smoke. No sooner were they uncorked than the blue vapors poured out and became transformed to living people, in whom the lady joyfully recognized her many servants and attendants. Her delight was complete when her brother, who had killed the magician under the form of a bull, was seen coming from the forest in his proper shape. And that very day, according to her promise, she gave her hand in marriage to the happy young tailor.